Hello and welcome to the Growing Healthy Families podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Haggerty. On this show, I interview the world's top health experts so that you can know with certainty what it takes to give your family a life of epic health and wellness.
As parents, we don't want to see our kids struggle. I knew that he had the potential. I knew that something needed to be done.
It was hard. We would get frustrated. We didn't know how to deal with it. I was more emotional about it.
Sure that, we're here. Amen to that, brother. Amen to that. Hello and welcome back to the Growing Healthy Families podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Haggerty and I'm your host. On this episode, moms and dads, what we're going to talk about is some really important information about things that we all deal with our kids, technology. And so, moms and dads, when we're talking about technology, we know that our kids are exposed to technology in ways that most of us who are moms and dads never have experienced. I am an almost 44-year-old man, and I remember the advent of video games when they started. And, it was something that I took an interest in, but never really took too seriously. I watched a number of people that I knew take them very seriously. I began to play them for hours and hours and hours at a time. And, it concerned me that they spent so much time doing that, but never really until I became a doctor and all of the work that I've done in neurology did I really understand the impact this was having on what we saw in the other aspects of their life. And I'm just going to give you an example. There was a young man that I grew up with. And, super bright, super intelligent. But when he was exposed to video games, he became, I would venture to say, nearly obsessive about playing them and beating them. And it was great because you saw how rapidly his brain was able to develop skills at these games. He would beat game after game after game after game. He would spend hours focusing on them. But what ended up happening, and this is something that moms and dads you probably have seen, is that he also socially withdrew. He became less interested in school, less interested in other activities. He would spend hours on top of hours on top of hours, literally just diving into these video games. As the video games became more immersive, he became more obsessed with the video games. And, as he became a teenager and then an adult, it did not get less, it became more. And he, spent money and time and energy devoted to video games. And what he did is instead of, becoming a high-functioning adult, he became a, underdeveloped, socially disconnected adult who lived his world essentially through a video game world. And moms and dads, this is something that, watching this happen, and most of us have seen this with people that we know, and oftentimes may be concerned about some of these things with our kids. I want you to understand that there are very specific things that have been addressed recently in the literature about the way that video games affect our brains, our kids' brains, and extended times in technology can affect us. One of the things that the research has shown very clearly is that technology, as I'm sure know, is addictive, especially with video games, because every time that, you get have a video game that's immersive, so you get lots of little dopamine hits. So it reinforces the desire to play the game. So what ends up happening is that the longer that you play this, though, the more aroused the brain becomes. Now, let me talk about what that means. So our brain is supposed to be one that's able to balance, able to adapt to stress, able to adapt to the world around us, able to disconnect from stress, go back into a normal, relaxed, focused, healthy state of balance. What they have found is that children and adults who play video games for long periods of time, their brains physically become addicted to the video games in some ways absolutely as much as people who do hardcore drugs like heroin. And so much so that back in 2017, the WHO created a diagnosis code for what they call video gaming disorder. And it was because in psychiatric circles, what they were finding is that people who were playing extended amounts of video games, their brains became wired the same way that an addict's brain becomes to alcohol or to drugs. And so they came out with some pretty strict recommendations about time of exposure. So especially in younger kids too, because their brains are so susceptible. So they talked about trying to limit a maximum of no more than an hour per day with very, very strict timelines. So if you can set controls and timers on the video games, whether it's on an iPad or on a video game system, to try and set it so it does not permit anything more than an hour per day. But moms and dads, let's talk a little bit more about what this means. So when a child plays a video game, many of you, especially if you have a child that has ADHD issues or ADD issues or issues with, even mild focus and attention, you probably have noticed they can become hyper focused when they play video games. And, the ability to focus is an important one. Hyperfocus can be dangerous. Extended hyperfocus has some significant consequences because we talk about this term all the time in my office, that nerves that wire together fire together. And what that means, that anything that we do often, our brain learns. And the more that it does it, the better that it gets at it. And that can be great for skills. It can be really bad and have negative consequences when a child is playing a lot of video games and they're not having a balance between the way that the brain is supposed to work and the brain's focus during these periods of video gaming. And what it does is it arouses the brain's stress system constantly. So the stress system is called the sympathetic nervous system. And the sympathetic nervous system is something where we should only really tap into it on an as-needed basis. We should not be spending extended periods of time in high levels of stress and high levels of focus. Well, if you look at a lot of the video games that kids play, right, they are very intense, very action-filled, which is why they get the dopamine hits. They are very exciting, but what it does is it keeps the child's brain so that it is in such a high state of attention and high state of focus, and they're processing at a massively accelerated rate of information. But what that does is it turns their sympathetic nervous system not just on, it turns it on to the maximum. And many of you have probably noticed that when your kids play video games for a long time, that the second that they get done, oftentimes they are not the best person. Meltdowns, crabby, not nice. It takes them forever to wind down, especially if they play them at night. Can't shut their brains off to save their lives. So if you want to look at that, understand that their brain has been so aroused. I mean, incredibly, incredibly stimulated. And what their brain is literally doing is it's processing all of the things they just saw. And, amazing thing about the nervous system, it's great. Their brain is figuring out ways to get better and better and better and better and better at that game. So in one aspect, it shows some really powerful changes within the brain. But the problem is that you cannot live in constant stress mode. And so, in my practice, we see a lot of kids with ADHD issues and ADD issues and emotional dysregulation issues, and you name it across the spectrum of neurodevelopmental disorders, we see it all. And one of the most significant things that we see is this significant imbalance between the sympathetic fight or flight stress response nervous system and the rest, digest, growth, development, healing, cognitive development, social development, parasympathetic side. Because what ends up happening is that when the sympathetics turn on, they turn down and in some cases turn off the function of the part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. Because there's a very simple rule, and I want you to remember this. You cannot be in growth and protection at the same time. Neurological rules. So when the brain switches on the fight or flight system, it takes down the function of all of the other non-critical systems as if you're, under attack. And all of the body's defenses go up, and anything that's preventative, anything that's maintenance, anything that's rest and recoup, it turns down. And it takes longer and longer and longer for us to recover from stress when we spend time in prolonged stress. That's why you notice oftentimes that when kids play video games, you tend to see that they are aroused, neurologically aroused, in a state of stress for prolonged periods of time afterwards. And the longer that they play video games, the longer it takes for them to disconnect, but also the more that they become addicted to the hits of dopamine they get from when they play. And so, when you talk about the limitations, one of the things that is really critical is that limiting the exposure, the amount of time that they can play any type of a video game, to no more than 30 minutes without a break. Right? Make them pause the video game, make them get up, make them move around, because they have to be able to disconnect their brain, at least temporarily, so they can limit the amount of exposure or the amount of arousal. And this is a rule, and I've talked about this in some of the other podcasts that we've done, about the 30-35 rule. And 30 minutes on, 5 minutes off of any type of an activity where that requires extended focus. And so if you're a mom and dad that has a job that requires lots of focus, that's mental focus, then spending 30 minutes in straight activity and then getting up and taking 5 to 7 minutes to fully disconnect, move around, get your body up and physically active, super important. With kids, it's even more critical because, developmentally, kids require motion and exercise for their brains to develop optimally. If they're not getting sufficient motion, then it disrupts brain development, delays brain development. Because, if you've had a kid that's ever gone in occupational therapy, right, or into physical therapy, they always want you to move, because when you can move, you can stimulate the brain, because the brain requires motion called proprioception that we can only get when our body is up, moving through gravity, moving in different directions. And motion is calming to our brain. It helps to reduce our stress response. It's the same reason why when you're stuck on an airplane for a long time, you want to get up and move around and you want to stretch. Or if you're in a meeting at work for a long time, you want to get up and move around. Or, when you were a kid, why you felt super antsy the longer that you had to sit still, because you weren't getting that calming influence of motion. And, kids were built to move, so it's really difficult for a child who wants to get up and move around when they're, sitting in a chair in class all day, having to wire themselves in to pay attention and not being able to move around at will. It's extremely difficult. And then if they come home and they spend extended periods of time staring at a computer screen and playing video games, well, now they're not getting physical stimulation from motion, and their sympathetic nervous system is on overdrive. And so because nerves that wire together fire together, so the brain gets really efficient at turning on the stress side of the nervous system, making them more predisposed to having issues with emotional dysregulation issues, anger, temperament, meltdowns, tantrums. And as I'm sure many of you have noticed, those things evolve. And, there's a number of things that obviously go together that will predispose them, but video games are one that can really make things go downhill fast, because it will really wire their fight or flight nervous system on to a much higher level than many, many other things will. And so when you talk about, the importance of these breaks, right, make sure that your kids have strict limitations, timers that tell them that they have to get up and move, or, shut off periods that you set in place so they can only play for so long. And then they have to bookend it with movement. Get them up, have them do some yoga, have them go for a run, have them get up and wiggle around, have them dance, have them go do exercise. Have them go do something that allows them to burn off neurological energy so the brain can calm down. Because if you don't, what you're going to deal with is a child's nervous system that's never disconnecting and is living in a perpetual state of stress. I would also tell you the most important thing that you can do to really change the equation for the child is take them to a pediatric chiropractor and get them adjusted. There is some amazingly clear research about this, and I'll tell you this from firsthand experience. It is absolutely ridiculous how much a child's brain calms down when they get adjusted. In our office, we see some of the most difficult cases you will ever see. Kids with severe ADHD, kids with severe oppositional defiant disorder, kids with severe autism, you name the condition and we see it. And, the only thing that we do in our office, and I don't mean to minimize when I say that, but the therapy, the treatment, the care that we use in our office is adjusting. And the adjusting is a very unique mechanism to change a child's brain, because what it does is it instantly changes the way that the brain works. When a child's not getting enough motion from exercise, or if they've got traumas that have accumulated that have prevented the spine from moving the way that it should, right? Or if they're getting, having, other stressors that are wiring the nervous system into a constant state of stress, when you adjust them, what the research has very clearly shown is it instantly switches off the stress side of the nervous system and turns on the parasympathetic nervous system, which then re-engages the prefrontal cortex. So, and what we look at over time is we see kids who go through their care plans, which, depending upon what they have, can vary in length from, a few months to, some kids with the more severe stuff it can take up to a year to get to a place where things stabilize. And that's, when we're talking about kids with like autism and things like that. But there's a frequency, there is a duration that's required to try and slow the momentum that the stress nervous system has built. And so when we adjust them, it's all about a process of momentum, building up momentum, calming the brain down, and then helping the brain so that it starts to rewire. But in between the visits, it's essential that mom and dad are very aware that the child needs to be in motion, that we need to try and limit the amount of downtime where they're sitting in front of a computer or staring at an iPad or staring at an iPhone. Because the more time they spend on those things, the more time the brain spends locked in, the more time that the brain is spending using the sympathetic fight or flight nervous system. And when you start understanding that, if you can put controls in place, you can help them to, kind of like turning down the temperature on the stove when the water's about to boil, you can back them down. And when you couple with with what we talked about with getting them adjusted and adding an exercise, and then also controlling nutrition, we're trying to minimize simple sugars in their diet, and then making sure that they're on a good sleep schedule, and that you're also trying to control emotional stress around them. All of those things help a child that is struggling with stress behaviors to be able to calm down and rewire their brain. Because always the brain is changeable. No matter where you are in life, no matter what you've been through, your brain is changeable. And we've seen it. One of the podcasts that we did in the past was with an adult named Paul. And Paul had severe issues all the way through his life with anxiety and anger and focus and attention. And he shared a story about how he went from someone who was at a point of being suicidal to someone now who's just living this amazing quality of life. And, what we talked about was that, we did the process of adjusting him, changing the way that his brain worked. And we came at it from the cause. There was a tremendous amount of noise that his spinal column was creating into his brain that had been there since he was a little kid. And so we introduced the process of change where the cause lied. And then over time, his brain began to slow down. What he did to help us is that he began to make lifestyle change. As he was seeing positive changes in the momentum of his brain feeling calmer and his emotions calming down and a sense of well-being beginning to change, well, then he also then said, well, I need to clean up my diet. I need to do more exercise. I need to do my part. And the momentum accelerated. So much so that, if you talk to him now, he is the most calm, relaxed, focused, chill guy you'll ever want to meet. But his brain literally rewired itself in the most powerful of ways. So think about that as a kid, right? Their brain does not have as many years of hardwiring as Paul's did. So if you start working early and you start consistency, then a child's ability to go and change the way their brain works changes tremendously. So think about technology and its impact as something where if you can put controls in place, have an importance for motion, don't allow the child to spend too many hours per day, right? So no more than an hour. And make sure that they are getting up and they are using their body, control the nutrition, get them adjusted, priority number one, because that's cause, right? The spine is the most significant contributing factor to if the brain is in stress mode or calmed. Because if the brain does not get normal motion from the spinal segments, then it creates a tremendous level of stress in the background that they can't turn off. And moms and dads, just really simple analogy, right? When you get a headache, think about how you feel, and not just the pain. What do you feel like emotionally? What are your thoughts like? Are you clear and focused? Are you able to pay attention? Do the sights and sounds around you seem amplified? All of those things literally are what children are going through in the background. It's the background noise that the spine can create that is on at all times. When you talk about kids with neurodevelopmental challenges, ADHD, ADD, sensory processing issues, in the vast majority of them, it's been there since the very beginning. And all it's done is just wire deeper and deeper and deeper into their nervous system. And so from the cause perspective, if you want to get in and change the input, change what's coming into the brain so the brain can change its output, you have to make sure that a significant component to that is getting that child adjusted so you can change the way their brain works. So I know obviously we went kind of deep on this. I know there's quite a bit of neurology into this. So hopefully this was clear. Hopefully this made sense what we were talking about. And if you have more specific questions, don't hesitate to contact us through Facebook or through our email, which is on our website. And you can go to elitefamilykairos.com and you can ask us more specific questions about how to help your child. If you're not in our geographic area, let us know. We are more than happy to help you to find providers that can help you to get your child's nervous system calmed down and also give you recommendations on ways to improve their quality of life and function. Because moms and dads, listen, I understand. I talk to hundreds and hundreds of moms and dads per year about the impact that these behaviors have on your family life. I get it. I am a dad of a daughter who was going down the road of neurodevelopmental challenges, and we thank the Lord helped to back her down and got her back onto the life that she was supposed to lead. But we saw it firsthand how difficult it was and the stress it was creating in our own family. And I know many of you are dealing with stress that's sometimes much more significant than what we were going through. But I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of moms and dads to help them to work their way through this road to healing their child's nervous system, improving their family dynamic, improving everyone's quality of life. So let us know if we can help you, because these struggles are not things that you have to continue to deal with. There are tons of resources out there, and we put some great resources in here today. And if there's more that needs to be done, we can talk about that. But don't hesitate to contact us if we can be a resource for you. Again, elitefamilykairos.com is our website. And you can also contact us directly through Facebook or social media. And we would also be more than happy to help you out do a consult with you, talk more specifically about what's going on, or to connect you with a provider in your local area so that you can get the more specific information that relates to what your child needs. So moms and dads, I hope this was helpful for you. Make sure that you show us that this is valuable by giving us a like where you watch this. If you're listening to us on iTunes, make sure that you rate us and review us. Make sure that you share this episode with somebody who needs to hear it, because the whole point of all of this is to help you, right? We create this information, all this content, so that your family can live a life of epic health and wellness. So make sure that you're spreading the message. Help us to grow our mission, because our mission is very simple. We want to help all the moms and dads out there to raise their children and their families in a way that you guys can live the best life possible. So thank you so much for being here with us today. This is Dr. Scott with Growing Healthy Families. God bless you all, and be elite. Thank you for listening to the Growing Healthy Families podcast, the world's #1 source for health education. Make sure to go to iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a review. Make sure to follow us on social media at the links listed in the show notes, and let us know what area of health you are struggling with, so we can get you and your family on the road to epic health.